So welcome to the first of our masterclass webinars with Mark Coleman, which we're very excited about. Lovely to see some familiar faces in the attendees, but also some new businesses, which is really great to see. So just to give a brief rundown about how today is going to flow, I'll just provide a brief opening remarks before passing on to Mark, who's going to deliver our webinar on freight and customs and exports and all things trade, which I think you'll find really informative. We are going to record today's session just for future use and to be stored on our export hub. If you have any concerns with that, please reach out. As I mentioned, we've got some new faces on the line, which is lovely to see. For those that don't know me, I'm Will Alford. I'm the manager of Agriculture Victoria's Pathway to Export program. The program is in its fourth year and is focused primarily on helping small, medium and emerging agri-businesses on their export journey. So we really focus on helping businesses that are interested in exports to learn the fundamentals, build confidence and capabilities, and also for those that are already exporting to select markets to consider other markets in their diversification process. Over the course of the 4 years, the program's done a lot of really exciting and positive things with various webinars, workshops. We launched the Export Hub, a newsletter, an established Vic House in Shanghai, and many other things. And through all this work, we've been receiving feedback and evaluations from our activities. And that's really contributed to this masterclass webinar series. These are core export topics that we're seeing year after year to be of real benefit and a real interest to businesses in your position. So this is a real product of our entire journey, and we're really confident and proud of this offering and Mark's immense wisdom in this space. So before I pass on to Mark, just to note that grateful if you can stay on mute during the presentation, but we really are eager for engagement. So there'll be a dedicated time for question and answer at the end of the webinar. But if you have a question that's pertinent to the slides, please raise your hand, put something in a chat box. We're really eager for this to be a dynamic hour. And also really eager to see some of your faces and see some of those light bulb moments go off when Mark goes through his learning. So I encourage you all, if you're able to put your videos on. And without further ado, I'll pass over to Mark to start off the session.
Thank you very much, Will, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Will said, definitely enjoy the questions either during the session or save them to the end. It doesn't put me off track, so feel free to either unmute yourself or put it in the chat group, raise your hands, and we will definitely answer your questions. A bit of a quick background on me. Who's this guy who's going to give you a quick overview of the pathway to exports? My name is Mark Coleman. I own a logistics company based out at Melbourne Airport, and I've been helping exporters, teaching exporters for around 20 years, and I've been in the industry for just on 30 years. So today I'm going to try and pass on some of that 30 years of knowledge, and mainly the things that I see that exporters don't fully understand about the export logistics process, and focusing on the agriculture side of products. I've dealt with some very large multinationals who you would assume know all about exports, and I'm going to assure you they also struggle with the export process. So whether you're a big company, been exporting for a little while, or brand new to it, I'm pretty sure you'll get a bit out of today's session. Alrighty. Let's have a look at where we are at the moment. What's going on in the logistics market? Well, we saw during COVID freight rates go through the roof. Exporting from Australia, say into China, container rates were up as high as $15,000 per container. We've seen that drop back a long way since then, and now freight rates, depending on where you're going, to most destinations, they're below $1,000. So to go from 15,000 down to 1,000 is a big drop. And when you start going into places like China, we're talking a few $100s for the container. To give you an idea how low they are, the trucking from your factory to the port is probably more expensive than the ocean freight charges from Australia into China and the Asian market. US is a little bit higher, New Zealand and Europe, but definitely Asia has come down a long way. We've seen a bit of a rise in the freight rates at the moment, but this is where exports can really take advantage. Australia has always had a situation with our freight rates that it has always been very cheap on the ocean freight side to export our goods, and even on the air freight side, freight rate, it's actually cheaper to export than what it is to import. And that is a great advantage to Australian exporters that we need to take advantage of. So freight rates are definitely well down from pre-COVID level. Transit times have improved. We saw transit times during COVID blow out to say 6 weeks into Asia. Into Europe, we were looking at around 2 months into Europe, and into the US, we were looking at transit times of around 3 months door to door. We've seen those transit times get back to pretty much close to pre-COVID levels, particularly with Asia and New Zealand. Europe, we've got a bit of a hiccup at the moment with the Red Sea, which I'll talk about in a moment. Transit times have increased a little, but transit times are now back to where they were. And depending on that, where you're going, you're looking at 2 to 3 weeks into Asia for sea freight, and obviously air freight. We're getting there to most parts of the world within a day. We've seen during COVID, we had major issues where there was shortage of containers. We had bookings on vessels, but we didn't have the containers. And it was quite awkward for me where I'd told a client that, yes, we have a booking on next week's container, on next week's vessel. But when they asked me to deliver a container, there were no containers available during COVID. That supply has pretty much got back to normal. So now there is plenty of space on vessels, on aircrafts, and there is also supply of standard containers and the food quality containers. We find that depending on the season, there can be a shortage of food quality containers. A food grade container is a container that is almost new. They may have sanded or painted the floors and painted the walls to make sure that it is absolutely spotless and suitable for food commodities. During spring, where there's a boost of exports, we do see a bit of a shortage. Heading into Chinese New Year, there is also a shortage of food grade containers. But at the moment, we can get a supply of standard and food grade containers. During COVID, to get space on a vessel, we were having to book at least 6 weeks in advance to most places in the world. That has almost got back to normal. The capacity of the number of vessels we have in the Australian market and the size of those vessels has increased. We have more flights, and that means that we have capacity to get exports out of Australia. Last year, in a world market, we saw an increase in the number of worldwide containers that were available, meaning how many ships were sailing. We saw an increase of just over 20% increase in the availability of space on vessels. And due to some very large vessels being completed and coming into service, we will see around a 25% increase in capacity for exports sea freight. So that's on a world scale. So we're definitely getting access to bigger ships, and that means that we can actually get better rates, and we can actually get on vessels that are departing in a few days' time because of that extra capacity. We have hit 2 little road bumps at the moment, the one being the Red Sea that everyone knows about. We've seen that vessels are predominantly avoiding the Red Sea. That means they're going down the bottom of South Africa. And that is putting a transit time increase of around 10 days. So where it was taking us around 6 weeks to get from Melbourne into the main European ports, we're seeing that blow out towards 7 to 8 weeks. So it has increased. The other negative effect with the Red Sea is we've seen freight rates increase a little. Still well below where they were during COVID, but they dropped down very low, and we've seen the freight rates increase a little. Even if you are not going via the Red Sea, freight rates have increased, including shipping into some Asian ports, into the US, where we go nowhere near the Red Sea. The shipping lines have used it as sort of a marketing tool to signify that there is chaos, and as such, they have increased all freight rates. So we have seen freight rates increase. No one knows when the Red Sea issue will resolve itself, although I did see one of the shipping lines announce overnight that they are predicting in the next 4 to 6 months the Red Sea issue will go away and the freight rates will return back to the same levels as they were a year ago. We've also got an issue with the Panama Canal. We as Australians don't use the Panama Canal too much. We only ever use the Panama Canal if we're going from Australia up to the east coast of America, into New York, Philadelphia type of area. The lake that feeds the Panama Canal is at a very low water level, and as such, the Panama Canal Authority have restricted the number of vessels that are allowed to go through the Panama Canal. As such, that is causing a backlog, which means the shipping lines are taking advantage of that and increasing freight rates. So we're not too sure when that will resolve itself, the drought there in that Central America area. But if you are heading to the east coast of the USA, expect that at least over the next 6 months, freight rates will be a little bit on the higher side. And the world economy, where everyone keeps talking about doom and gloom, but from an exports point of view, we are seeing that exporters are still doing very successful. High volumes of exports are still leaving Victoria, despite the fact that everyone's saying that things are going to slow down. The local economy here in Australia seems to be still very strong, and that is definitely positive. So hopefully those trends will continue on. Now, one thing I say to a lot of exporters, everyone wants to get into exports, but the question is, are you ready to export? And a lot of people go, oh, yes, we've got a nice factory, we've got a nice product, yes, we're ready to export. And you've got to think about why you're going to export and will you be able to manage it? The first thing you have to look at is your product selling well in the Australian market. If you're struggling in the Australian market, the last thing you want to do is try and add the issues of exporting into that. So you've got to make sure that what you're doing here in Victoria is you've got a stable business, a stable domestic market, your product is well received, and that way you can start focusing on exports, knowing that what you've got here in Australia is working well. The other thing where I see a lot of people go wrong with exports, that they've decided to get into exports, but they're not really ready or able to increase their demand. People will go, oh, look, we're selling, 10,000 units. Let's look at exporting. Well, when you go into some of these countries, they may place a single order for 10,000 units. Are you able to double your production in a short lead time? So before you start trying to find customers, go back and have a look at your own production and see, do you have the capacity to increase? If you don't have the ability to increase your production without robbing the domestic market, you may not be ready for exports, and you may want to delay your export program until you have the system in Australia, in Victoria, where you are able to increase your production. Another thing where I see a lot of exporters go wrong is that they're not willing to change their product. They go, no, I love my product. It's perfect the way it is. Well, it may work well in Australia. People may love the look of it, how it works, how it tastes, the way the product grows, whatever it might be. But other countries have different taste buds, they prefer different ingredients. So regularly, I see that Australian exporters are being asked to adapt their product. Are you able to or willing to change the packaging? Are you willing to change the branding of your product? Are you willing to actually give it a totally new name for that market? If you are steadfast that this is your product and I'm not willing to change it, once again, maybe export's not for you. Now, if you've got a totally unique product that no one else is in the world is making, you may be able to get away with that attitude, but you will need to look at making some changes. It might be the flavor or the ingredients that you're using. They may like it a little bit more spicier than what you've got it at the moment. For example, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has a different recipe for every country in the world. So if you enjoy Coca-Cola in Australia, if you go over to countries, say like Brazil, you'll probably hate Coca-Cola. It tastes totally different because Coca-Cola are aware that different countries have different taste buds, and they've been willing to change their secret recipe for their product. Are you willing to do the same? A big thing with exports is going to be cash flow. If your company does not have a good cash flow situation at the moment, you may need to look at another investor, speak to your bank, or hold off until you are in a better situation. If your Australian sales, you might be used to be getting paid in 30, 60 days. Once you start going into the export market, that can easily blow out to 60, 90 days. Is your business able to withstand that delay in payment? So cash flow is really important for the longer payment terms that you're going to be facing. Also, do you have the staff with the experience and the time to devote to exports? Regularly, when I meet up with someone who's exporting, I'll actually ask them, what is their background? What did you do prior to taking on exports? And sometimes I'm hearing, oh, I was the receptionist and now they got me heading up exports. Or I used to, be on the production line packing the boxes and they asked me to handle their exports. Well, exports, there is a lot of skill, time, and knowledge required. So before you get into exports, once again, have a look at your staffing. Are you able to devote a person, maybe not a full-time role, but are you able to have a person who can devote several hours a day in handling all those export inquiries, handling the orders, dealing with the shipping lines, the wharfs, customs, trucking, the airlines, all of those things, dealing with a quarantine. So it is really important that you have the ability of staff within your organisation who is able to continue to develop the exports. And also, what makes your product better than the competition? If your product is exactly like everyone else's in the world, are you going to succeed? Maybe not. The great thing that we have here in Victoria is we have a brilliant reputation for the quality of our food products. And sometimes that is the advantage. Yours might be the same price, the same flavour, but it's the reputation of the Australian product. For example, milk powder. Into China, it's the only milk powder that people want because of our reputation. So you want to be looking at what is the difference between my product and the competitor's product. And if there is no difference at all, well, maybe you won't be successful in exporting. So need to look through, why am I exporting? Am I ready to export? And once you can answer all of these questions, then you can start to look at getting into exporting, because it's not cheap to get into exporting. So make sure that you are able to do all of those things on the screen, and that way you're not wasting your money. But one of the big things that I see exporters failing when they start quoting clients is Incoterms. Incoterms, or international commercial terms, are an international term that everyone, whether you're an importer or an exporter, needs to understand. If you do not understand Incoterms, you cannot give a quote to your client. If you're importing product, you cannot receive a quote without an Incoterm. So it is very important that whether you're already exporting or that you're about to get into exporting, you understand Incoterms. So they were first issued in 1936, issued by the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce. They've been revised several times in 53, 76, 90, 2000, 2010, and on screen we now have the 2020 version of the Incoterms. So what are Incoterms? What do they do? Those three letters worldwide will define who is responsible for getting the the licenses, the permits, and who has to prepare the documentation for importing and exporting. Those Incoterms, depending on which one you use, will dictate who has to book the freight with either the airline or the shipping line. The Incoterm will dictate who has to insure the goods. Do you have to insure it as the exporter, or is your customer going to insure it? The Incoterm will tell you. It will also tell us where the transfer risk point is. And what that means is that during the transport chain, there is a certain point that when it passes that point, it is no longer your risk and it is your customer's risk. And that means that if the goods are damaged, it is your customer's problems. So it might be that the cargo's in your car park and it's damaged. Depending on the Incoterm, that may be your problem or it may be your customer's problem. Might be on a truck on the way to the wharf and it has an accident. Depending on which Incoterm you use, it will depend if that's your problem as the exporter or your customer's problem. It might be out at sea and the vessel goes through a storm and the cargo's damaged. Depending on which Incoterm you use, that could be your problem or your customer's problem. What most of us use Incoterms is a division of cost. Who pays for what? Who pays for the tracking? Who pays for the ocean freight, the air freight, customs clearance, delivery at the end? The Incoterm will define it. And it also defines who is responsible for packing up the cargo and inspecting it. So I think we've got about 11 Incoterms there. Let's have a look at just a few. We're not going to look at all of them. We don't have time, but let's have a look at the main ones and try and get a bit of an understanding of what they actually mean and how they work. So as I said, it is compulsory to use an Incoterm with every single quote. Now, where a lot of exporters go wrong, new and experienced, is that when they give someone a price, they just state the price of the goods. Let's say you manufacture pens. If you just say to a customer, they're $1 each, the question is, does that include freight? Does it not include freight? All you've said is $1 each. We don't know. Does it include customs clearance? Does it include the delivery at the end? Does it include the quarantine inspection? If you've just said $1, no one knows. So it is compulsory every single time you say a price, you also say the Incoterm. So maybe $1. Let's start off with X works. So what does that mean? Let's say that you're the exporter and I am your customer. I am buying these pens from you. And if you say they are $1 each, X works. I'm going to try and draw on the screen here, see if it'll actually work for me. Yep. So what that means, should have stopped there. X works means X your factory. So they are $1 each, X your factory. That tells me, your customer, that you're going to put them available at your factory door. And it also tells me, your customer, that it is my responsibility and my cost to get it from your factory to the port or the airport. Me, your customer, I have to pay for the freight to get it to my destination. I have to pay for the customs clearance and delivery all the way to my door. When you say $1 X works, you have been very clear in stipulating that you are going to put it at your factory door, pay for nothing, and your customer pays for everything else. We've got FOB. What does that mean? You might say the pen's worth $1.20 FOB. That means you are going to pay to get it to the port here in Melbourne, and me, your customer, I am going to pay for the clearance and delivery to my country, plus delivery to my warehouse door. Another common one that people use is CFR, and you always state the port you're going to, maybe CFR Hamburg, CFR New York, CFR Bangkok, whatever it might be. You might say the pen is worth $1.50 each, CFR Hamburg. The moment you've said that, you have actually told your customer that you are going to pay to get it to Hamburg, but it is the buyer's responsibility to get it off the boat or the plane, cleared and delivered. The one that I like the best, this is for me, for exporters, this is my preferred one, CIF. So you might say this pen is $1.60 CIF. The moment you say CIF Los Angeles or whichever port you're going to, you have told me that you are going to pay, you as the exporter are going to pay to get to the destination, and you're also going to insure the goods during transport. And by saying CIF, I know as the customer, you're going to insure it, and I am going to pay for the clearance and delivery to the door. Very, very clear. When you've said the price and the Incoterm, I can instantly see what you're going to pay, and me as the buyer, what I am going to pay. You got DAP Shanghai. That is basically door to door, excluding taxes. And then DDP Bangkok, DDP Hong Kong, you'd say the port again. Once again, door to door, including taxes. So you can see the Incoterm will define who's paying for what. Every single quote must have an Incoterm. Every single invoice must have an Incoterm. Clearly defines it. If you don't understand Incoterms, I'm willing to do a bit more one-on-one time with yourselves and explain them in more details. But remember, it's compulsory on every single quote. Other things which is a great advantage for Australian exporters is certificate of origins. You may be required to prepare a certificate of origin for your exports. So why are we getting a certificate of origin? Could be that there's preferential duty rates. So certain countries have said that if you get me a certificate of origin, we'll get a lower duty rate. Other reasons you might have to get a certificate of origin is because of import quotas. So certain countries will have a maximum amount they will buy from Australia on a yearly basis. So they use the certificate of origin to tick off Australia's quotas. At the moment, we are very lucky. We have 18 free trade agreements with 29 different countries. And that means there are 29 countries around the world that we may have an advantage over our competitors based on the duty rates. We will pay lower or zero duty rates. I've listed some of the free trade agreements here. We've got TAFTA, MAFTA, CAFTA, CHAFTA. There is, as I said, 18 different free trade agreements. We've just recently completed a free trade agreement with the UK and India last year, and we're in the process or about to start more free trade agreements negotiations with the UAE, and also one for the Middle Eastern region. These free trade agreements give you as an exporter great advantage over our competitors. Now, there is a good website that you can look up there, which is run by DFAT, the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Trade, called dfatportal.dfat.gov.au. You can go into that website, type in what your product is, the country you're going to, and you can find out what your duty rate is to that country. So let's have a look at some of these free trade agreements that we have in place. So
Mark, sorry to interrupt there.
Yes.
Before you jump off into this analysis, which looks fascinating, just to flag a question from Alistair in the thread.
Yes.
Alistair's typed, I've heard FIS mentioned in some discussion. Is that part of the Incoterm set or represented by another term?
Yeah, so FIS is free into store. It is not an international term. Do not use FIS for your international transactions, because it's not internationally known. There is no written definition. These Incoterms we've got here on the screen, there is a book issued by the ICC that clearly defines every one of these terms. FIS, there is no written legal definition. So if you're shipping to Perth, use FIS free into store. If you're shipping to Bangkok, FIS means delivered to their door, and that means you would use one of the D terms that we have there, DAP, DPU, and DDP. So depending on what you want to pay and don't want to pay, you would be using one of those D terms. Once again, if you want to get down into the nuts and bolts of it, definitely we can have a chat about it, but do not use FIS for international. Good question. So let's have a look at these FTAs. Where is the advantage for Australian exporters with these FTAs? So let's have a look at, we've got some meat of bovine animals, frozen, boneless. So this is going into countries that are signed up for the ANZ FTA, which is around, I think it's about 7 or 8 different countries. You can see that different free trade agreements at different stages, the duty rate will drop. So we have one free trade agreement that we call the CEPA. The duty rate dropped down from 5% to 0 in 2020. That got a group of countries. And then we have another group of countries that have signed up to the Australia and New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, Australia, Asia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. We've found that in 2022, this year, the duty rate dropped from 5 down to 0. So that was great. We have a look at another one here, exporting off to Vietnam. Let's say that you wanted to export some food supplements or preparations off to Vietnam, and you're wondering, what is the duty rate? Well, the standard duty rate for imports into Vietnam is 80% for this product. So that probably means that people from Europe and the USA are paying 80% duty to send this product to New Zealand. But we have a free trade agreement. So we have New Zealand, with Vietnam, we have 2 free trade agreements between Australia and Vietnam. And we can choose which free trade agreement we want to use. So if you were exporting this product today to Vietnam, there's 2 types of free trade agreements, 2 types of certificate of origin. You would want to be getting the what we call the TPP free trade agreement, because that gets your duty rate from 80% straight down to 56%. And as you can see, over time, it drops. But we have another free trade agreement, the Australia and Asia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. You can see there in 2021, it's dropped from 80% down to 20%. So if you were exporting it this year, you would want to be getting an ANZ FTA certificate of origin. But in a few years' time, in up to 25, it will drop down to below 15 to 10 and then to 0. So you would get a different certificate of origin. 2 free trade agreements, 2 different certificate of origins. Depending on where the duty rates are, you might get this certificate of origin or you might get the other certificate of origin. We've got milk type products into Indonesia. As you can see, the standard rate for most exporters was 5%. In 2020, we got it dropped down to 4%. And in 2032, which is a little bit away, we can see that Australian exporters, we will then get that down to duty-free status. So straight away, our competitor is paying 5%. Australian products are paying 4%. We have a 1% duty advantage over our competitors. Beverages. Into Vietnam, as you can see, there are 3 different free trade agreements that we can use for Vietnam for beverages. Alcoholic beverages, standard duty rate is 56%. So all our competitors who are sending, say, wine, for example, sending wine into Vietnam, they are paying 56%. Today, if you are a wine exporter, you would probably want to be using the Australia, Asia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement Certificate of Origin, because that gets it from 56% to 20%. So you have a huge advantage over our competitors. In 2025, it will drop down, start dropping down to 15, 10, and in 2028, it will drop down to 0%. So as you can see, we have different free trade agreements that we can use. That is an advantage. So think about it. If you were, say, competing against a French wine, a French bottled wine was worth $1, it was worth $100, and your bottle of wine was worth $100. You might think to try and compete with the French, you have to lower your price to try and beat the French. No, the French are paying 56% duty when they import to Vietnam. Australian wine, we're only paying 20% duty. So you could actually increase the price of your wine, say up to $120 a bottle, and by the time duty is added on, you would still be cheaper than the French wine, because the French are paying 56% duty versus Australian wine, 20% duty. So if you are ever thinking of, gee, which market should I try and export to? Which country should I choose to start exporting my product to? That website that we had there, the DFAT website, is a brilliant website. You can see what the duty rate is for all the different countries that we trade with. And you might decide, oh, we're going to go to Vietnam because we have very low duty rates with exports to Vietnam or to Indonesia or to Malaysia or to Japan. So use these free trade agreements to your advantage and in choosing your export market. When you are exporting, there are various documentation that you must prepare. The main one to prepare is the invoice. Make sure that your invoice has a currency and has an Incoterm. I see a lot of invoices do not have a currency or an Incoterm, so it's very important that you have that listed. You can use your stock standard domestic invoice. Just make sure you remember stating that Incoterm and stating Australian dollars. You will be required to prepare a packing list. Packing list customs don't pay too much attention, but what is very important to the packing list, make sure that it is accurate. Make sure that the weights have not been guessed. Make sure that you actually have accurate details to the pieces and the weights. Another document that you must have for your exports is, in the case of sea freight, a bill of lading, or in the case of air freight, an airway bill, or if you're just sending it by DHL or FedEx, a con note. Just be aware that when you are sending sea freight, there are two types of bills of lading. There is one that we call an original bill of lading, and the other is called an express release bill of lading. They are two clear, different types of bills of lading, and they have two different purposes. An original bill of lading is a document of title, and that means that the buyer, your customer, cannot collect the goods until you courier the bill of lading to your customer. So if you are exporting your goods and you have not received payment, it is a very good idea to get an original bill of lading and do not courier it to your customer until you have been paid. Once you have been paid, then courier the original bill of lading overseas. Whoever is holding on to that bill of lading controls the goods. So if you do not want your customer to collect the goods, ask for an original bill of lading. If you've already been paid in advance, it's an intercompany transfer, or it's someone that you trust, someone that you've been dealing with for years, that's when you would get an express release bill of lading. And that means that you can just email it off to your client. So remember, two types of bills of lading. An original must be couriered to your customer once you've received payment. And then we have an express release bill of lading. That is when payment is not of concern and you can just email it off to your customer. It is a document of title, so be aware of that. The certificate of origin, depending on which country you're dealing with, you may have to get the certificate of origin from the Chamber of Commerce, or you may be able to prepare the certificate of origin yourself. For example, if you're exporting to China, you must get the certificate of origin from the Chamber of Commerce. But if you're exporting off to the USA, you can make up your own or just put a statement on your invoice, made in Australia. If you're going to India, you must get it from the Chamber of Commerce. If you're going to Thailand, you must get it from the Chamber of Commerce. But if you're going off to New Zealand, you can make up your own certificate of origin. If you're going off to Japan, you can make up your own certificate of origin. Malaysia, the UK, you can make up your own certificate of origin. If you are unsure, speak to your freight forwarder, speak to your Chamber of Commerce, or feel free to reach out to me, and I will tell you whether you need to get an official certificate of origin from the Chamber of Commerce, or are you able to make up the certificate of origin yourself. If you can make it up yourself, that will save you a few dollars at the same time. Depending on your product, you may be required to get a health certificate or a quarantine certificate. Depending on the country you're going to, you may need to get a health certificate. For example, if you're going to New Zealand, you may not have to get a certificate of origin. If you may not have to get a health certificate. But if you're going to China, you must get a health certificate. Depending on your product, it may need to be inspected prior to shipment, or it may not. So, for example, if you're exporting grain, the product must be inspected prior to export to get your health certificate. If you're exporting timber, you must have the shipment inspected prior to export. But if you were exporting, say, milk powder, you don't have to have it inspected. If you're exporting muesli bars, you don't have to have it inspected prior to shipment. Olive oil does not have to be inspected prior to shipment. So depending on the country you're dealing with and depending on your product, you may need a health certificate or you may not. And it may need to be inspected by a quarantine officer prior to shipment, or it may not. Once again, if you are not sure, feel free to reach out and I can walk you through that whole process of the inspections, whether it's needed or not.
Mark, just to jump in with another question from the thread. Shanks just asked, regarding certificates of origin and the use of the Chamber of Commerce, what are the indicative costs associated for their services?
You're looking at around $45 to $65, depending on if you're a member of that Chamber of Commerce or not, and depending on the country you're going to. So they charge a different fee depending on the country and whether you're a member of the Chamber of Commerce or not. So somewhere between $45 and $65 per certificate. Countries like the USA, you can get a yearly certificate, where places like the Middle East, China, you have to get a certificate of origin for every single shipment. So if you're sending a shipment out once a week, you have to get a certificate of origin once a week. It's all done online, very quick and easy to do. They don't need to inspect the goods. You've just got to sign up and register. All righty. Insurance. A lot of people assume that once they give the goods over to their freight company, the shipping line or the airlines, if those guys damage or lose the cargo, I'm sure that everyone thinks that they would actually pay for that loss. No, it doesn't quite work that way. And I highly recommend, as an exporter, you insure your goods. In my opinion, anyone who exports without insurance is crazy. And I'll explain why I have that thought. It's not compulsory. It's just what is the best practices. So why am I saying you should insure your goods? Limited liability is the first one. I'll look at that in the next slide. Lack of control is another reason why you want insurance. You have no idea what happens to your cargo after it leaves your warehouse, and you probably don't want to know. We've all seen those videos of the guys at the airlines throwing your suitcases around. The same thing happens with your cargo. Now, if you're shipping a full container, nice and safe, because you would seal the container and your customer is the one who would probably be the first to open up the doors. But if you're sending your cargo air freight or via what we call LCL, less than container load, if you're sending your cargo via LCL service, which is a shared container, that's where you might ship one pallet and we get a pallet from you, a pallet from them, 3 pallets from them, and we do a mixed container. We call that LCL cargo. If you're shipping air freight or LCL cargo, you have no control over what happens to your cargo. You can put fragile stickers and all of that stuff over your cargo. It means nothing. So you want insurance because of lack of control. General average is a shipping term where the shipping line can come back and ask for more money if something major happens during the shipment. So you've paid the shipping line the $1,000 to get your cargo, say, from Australia to the UK, but something happens during that journey and the shipping line have every legal right to come back and ask for more money. Even if you did nothing wrong, you may need to pay more money. So everyone remembers the Ever Given, got stuck in the Suez Canal, got stuck sideways, stuck there for, I don't know, what was it, 2 weeks or something like that? That cost millions and millions of dollars to rescue that ship. Everyone thought, well, the shipping line will pay for that. No, everyone who had a container on board that boat had to pay extra because of this general average clause. If you have insurance, the insurance will pay. If you don't have insurance, you will be required to pay more money. So best to have insurance. We've got wars, strikes going on everywhere, bankruptcy of shipping lines. We haven't seen any shipping lines. We've seen one shipping line go bankrupt over the last 2 years. I don't think we'll see any more over the next year, but I expect that shipping lines over the next 12 to 24 months will start losing money. If you have insurance and the shipping line go bankrupt, the insurance company will pay all costs and get your cargo to the destination. So a really good idea to have insurance. But this is the main reason why I recommend that you have insurance, whether you're exporting or importing, always have insurance. Everyone who touches your goods has a thing called limited liability, and that means that's the maximum that they are going to pay. So in the case of air freight, the airlines have a maximum liability of 22 SDRs per kilo. You might think, what's an SDR? Stands for a special drawing right. When I last checked, a special drawing right was worth about 70 cents Australian. So have a think about this. We do our shipments for a French fashion company, and they import. So this is an import example, but it's exactly the same. We import sunglasses for them. Been importing sunglasses for them since the early 80s. And it was regularly during the 80s and 90s and the early noughties that the airline staff would steal the sunglasses. Now, you would think, well, if the staff of the airline steal the sunglasses, wouldn't the airline pay? No, the airlines will pay a maximum amount of 22 SDRs. So let's say, for example, a box of sunglasses, probably that by that, probably only weighs 5 kilos, but it's probably got $10,000 worth of sunglasses in it. Let's say someone at the airline stole that box. How much will the airlines give us if they for compensation? Grabbing our calculator, the box weighed 5 kilos. Here on the slide, you can see that the airlines will pay us 22 SDRs per kilo. So 5 times 22, 5 times 22, that's 110. What's today's exchange rate? An SDR is just like a US dollar, the euro fluctuates up and down. It's what we call a fictional currency. Last I checked was 70 cents times 0.7. I will get $77 from the airlines. Even though $10,000 worth of goods were stolen while it was in the airline's possession, they're going to pay me $77 in compensation. If I have insurance, the insurance will pay. If the airlines, if you don't have insurance, yeah, you'll get a little bit of money, but not covering the goods. Shipping lines are the same. They have 22 SDRs per kilo or 666 SDRs per package. So if the shipping lines lose the cargo, they're only going to pay that amount. Freight forwarders, me, only $100. That's the maximum every freight forwarder in Australia has to pay. And then we've got our trucking companies. That's that clause that they've got a clause saying we are not common carriers. That's a technical term saying trucking companies, couriers, all of those guys for all our shipments around Australia domestically, they will pay $0. So I highly recommend that you insure your goods. Whoop, gone too far. Getting paid. This is probably the most important part of the whole export journey, getting paid. There are various ways you can get paid under telegraphic transfer. That's just where you go to the bank and they make payment. You've got prepayment, payment in advance. That's got to be your goal. But in reality, most exporters do not get full payment in advance. Some exporters are getting post-payment, meaning you ship the goods off, then you get paid. Be aware there's a cash flow issue there. You've got to buy your raw materials, manufacture it, ship it off, then you get paid. That's what some people do. What is very common, and I would say, I don't know, something like 60, 70% of exports are done in this way. It's where you get a deposit up front, maybe 30 or 40%, get that up front. You then ship the goods off, then you get paid. Once again, you've got a cash flow issue and you've also got a risk. You're shipping your goods off and you haven't been paid for. So make sure you know how to manage it. You might decide to give them credit terms, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days after shipment. Once again, can your cash flow manage that? And then you've got consignment. That's where you ship the goods off. It sits in your customer's warehouse and you only get paid once your customer has actually sold the goods. Very big cash flow issues and also a very big risk. You've got cargo sitting in someone else's warehouse that you haven't been paid. Every one of those options there have their own risk and you need to make sure that you are managing them. If payment is a worry, if you've never dealt with this customer, it's a customer who's got a history of bad payments, think of going to your bank and getting a letter of credit. A letter of credit is a bank topic, is a bank product where you are guaranteed payment. The buyer goes broke, you're guaranteed payment. The container falls off the boat, you're guaranteed payment. Your buyer hasn't got any money at the moment and may pay you in a week or two. No, under a letter of credit, you get paid straight away. So if payment is an issue, go and have a chat with your bank about letters of credit. Particularly if the economy, world economy does start to deteriorate, definitely have a think about a letter of credit because you are guaranteed payment. I love letters of credit. I started my career at Westpac Bank handling letters of credit and I still handle letters of credit today. So a great product if risk is a concern. Banks do have other products that we call collections or draft. You are not guaranteed payment, but the bank chases payment for you. So rather than you ringing up your customer to chase payment, your bank does it for you. You pay a small little fee, but the bank does all the groundwork for you. So that is another issue. And be very careful of the currency exchange rates. Try and sell in Australian dollars. That's got to be your goal. But you've got to realise that you are playing in a world market. And if you want to play with the big boys, normally means you've got to play with the big boys currency, and that's US dollars. So there is a risk. From when you quote your client to when you get paid, there could be a 6-9 months time difference. And the exchange rate may have gone up or down. Once again, if you speak to your bank, you can manage that risk and lock in an exchange rate. That means the quote you gave to your client today, that exchange rate, you can use it in 3, 6, 9, 12 months' time. So exchange rates are a risk, but there are ways to manage it. Oh, so there we go. That was a quick overview of the major things that I see that exporters need to get a very strong grasp on. Are you ready to export? Make sure that you know and understand Incoterms. Use insurance where possible. Make sure that you know what documents are needed and try and take advantage of the free trade agreements because they are of a great benefit to us Victorian exporters. Well,
wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark. I think we would all agree that was a wonderful mix of theoretical knowledge, but also a lot of first-hand practical advice that I know a lot of business owners will really appreciate. So we've got about 2 minutes for questions. I'll ask one of Maha's questions around any costs of letters for credit before opening it up to the floor for any others in the remaining time.
So a letter of credit, that was the product where you're guaranteed payment. Depending on the value, the higher the value, the more you pay, but they would cost somewhere between $100 and probably $500. If you were doing a multi-million-dollar transaction, you might pay a $500 fee. So you will have to pay a few $100s for the letter of credit, but if you're guaranteed payment, I'd be happy to pay a $200 bank fee to be guaranteed to get $500,000 in your bank account. Each bank have a different fee. That fee is negotiable. You can haggle it down. It is one thing that you can definitely haggle with the bank, but yeah, a few $100s.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. And just while anyone else thinks of any final questions, just to flag, Kale's going to post in the thread an evaluation form, and I know everyone looks forward to completing these, but it does really help us to deliver more wonderful events like this. So if you've got a few minutes just after this webinar to quickly fill out the evaluation form, that would be greatly appreciated.
All righty, questions just come in. Are Incoterms a big negotiating point? X works the easiest. X works for you exporters is the easiest. You just say it's $1 each, come and get it. Not very good service. You're telling someone on the other side of the world to come all the way to your factory and collect it. It is negotiable. Like you can negotiate the price, you can negotiate the Incoterm. That's where it's important to understand what you're paying and what they're paying. So be very careful of the D terms. That's DAP, DDP, because that means you're responsible for all the costs door to door. Great service, but there are a lot of costs that you need to be aware of. So in that question, they are a negotiating point. I like CIF. That's my preferred Incoterm. It gets good service to your customer, gives you control, but doesn't expose you to other costs that you may not be prepared for. Any other questions? Looks like we're good. Right on.
Wonderful.
3. So in that chat group, as Will said, please click that link and do complete it. Does give us some feedback on how to run these in the future. Do we need to tinker with this one? But yeah, definitely try and complete that.
Thanks very much, Mark. And that brings us to a conclusion. Thank you so much, Mark, for your time. I think you are definitely a guru in this space, and it's no surprise that you were the first person we came to kick off our masterclass series. We, as a government, can't direct you to any businesses, but I think his details are on the screen, and you can see from today's webinar that he is a man very much in the know. So if you have any questions about export, please reach out to the Pathways to Export team, or for anything specific to Mark's presentation, feel free to reach out to him directly. The recording will be going up on our export hub, and we do have quite an extensive program of forward events, including workshops, webinars, and some one-on-one coaching leading up to 30 June. So I encourage you all to sort of stay actively monitoring your inbox for future updates.
Just a quick one, Will, sorry to interrupt you. I think that was the final question from Naomi regarding whether there's another option for a letter of credit towards the bottom there. I believe that's what the question's asking.
So with the letter of credit, it's a bank product where you're guaranteed payment. If you are looking for a guaranteed payment, that's really the only bank product. I'm not sure what EFIC are doing. There is a government body, the Export Finance and Investment Corp. I think they've slightly changed their name. They may be able to look at some sort of form of guarantees. But as far as I know, For exporters, for general type of commodities, food stuff, or guaranteed payment in advance, obviously guaranteed payment, or a letter of credit are really your two options. Get your money up front before you ship it, or go to the bank and get a letter of credit is the only way you're going to be guaranteed of getting the money in your bank account.
Wonderful. Well, we might stop it there. Any further questions, you can reach out to us via email or to Mark directly, and look forward to seeing you at the next Pathways Export event. Have a good afternoon.
See you later, everyone.
Cheers.